This is the lesson for Secondary 1 Math, lesson number 6-3. In this lesson, we are going to put functions together. And at the top of this page, it says that their functions are relations where each element in the domain is mapped to exactly one element in the range. That is, for every value of x, there is exactly one value of y. So that's something we already know about functions. In order to understand how functions are related, we have to basically relate them. So we have to understand how to perform different arithmetic operations on functions. So in this lesson, we're going to add, subtract, multiply, and divide exponential and linear functions. So at the top of this page, we have a list of defined functions, and so those are basically the definitions that we're going to use for this set of problems. So in number 1, f of 3 plus g of 12. So there's two functions. We've worked before with something that just says f of 3, and we've worked with something that just says g of 12. But what we're going to do this time is put them together, and this time we're going to put them together by adding. So basically it's two problems that we'll then put together. So the first thing I'm going to do is f of 3. And f of 3, I'm going to use the f function, which is 4x minus 5, but instead of x, I'm going to put 3. So this is just like what we did in the warm-up. And you're going to evaluate that function, so that's 12 minus 5, which is 7. And so I know instead of f of 3, that's really the number 7. The next one I'm going to do is g of 12. And so I'm going to use this function because that's g. And so negative 3 times 12 plus 7. And so negative 3 times 12 plus 7, that's going to be negative 36 plus 7, which is negative 29. And so I know that instead of g of 12, that's really negative 29. So what my real issue is I'm going to say 7 plus negative 29, and that simplifies to negative 22. So that is what f of 3 plus g of 12 is equal to. And that's my answer. Okay, let's try another one. This one looks a little bit confusing because it has the parentheses, the f of negative 3, but then it also has these brackets. That's just another set of parentheses. So what we're going to do is we're going to work from the inside out. So the first thing I'm going to do is just focus on f of negative 3. So again, I'll use the f of x function. So f of negative 3 is equal to 4 times negative 3 minus 5. That's negative 12 minus 5, which is negative 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this, except for instead of what's inside here, I'm just going to write negative 17. So I'm going to have negative 4, and then my brackets act as parentheses for this type of problem. So negative 4 times negative 17, and that gives me positive 68. So my answer for negative 4 times f of negative 3 is 68. Number 3, g of 15 divided by 4. So pause the video and go ahead and try this one. What you should have done, g of 15, we're going to use the function g, so negative 3 times 15 plus 7 divided by 4. And so the first thing I have to do is this numerator part. So negative 3 times 15 is negative 45. And then I'm going to add 7, so that's going to give me negative 38 divided by 4. And then I'll simplify that. And it says do not round, and so that indicates that we can use decimals as long as we don't round them. So the answer to this is going to be negative 9.5. You can just get your calculator and do negative 38 divided by 4. Number 4, h of 5 minus g of 5. This is a lot like number 1. We're going to deal with this part of it first, and then we're going to deal with the second part of it, and then we'll put them together using the subtraction. So the first thing, h of 5, so there's my h of x, so I'm going to say 2 to the 5th power, which is 32. So you can just put that in your calculator and find out that that's 32. So what I'm going to do, just for temporary purposes, I'm going to put 32 right there. And then the g of 5, that's going to use my g of x, so I'm going to say negative 3 times 5 plus 7. So that's negative 15 plus 7, which is negative 8. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to write negative 8, and I've got 32 minus negative 8. And so that comes out to be 40. And so I would say that h of 5 minus g of 5 is equal to 40. Okay, number 5, m of 8, so here's m, over v of 5. So there's v of x. So m of 8, 1/2 times 8 minus 10. And then v of 5, we're going to put 5 in for x right here, but we look and there's no x. V of 5 is equal to 2, no matter what. What that really is, by the way, is it's just the same thing as saying y equals 2. It's just a line. It doesn't matter what the input is. The output's always 2. So this one is easier because I'm just going to have a 2 in my denominator. So the top part of this, 1/2 of 8 is 4 minus 10. And so that's going to be negative 6 over 2, which is negative 3. Okay, number 6, negative f of negative 3. So we need to look at this as two pieces. We've got the opposite of whatever the answer to f of negative 3 is. So I've got to first do f of negative 3. So f of negative 3, using my f of x function, 4 times negative 3 minus 5. So that's negative 12 minus 5, which is negative 17. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in for f of negative 3, but then remember I've got this minus, and so I'm going to take the opposite of that. So minus negative 17, or the opposite of negative 17, and so the answer is 17. Okay, number 7, m of 14, so there's m, minus f of negative 1. So we'll just do a piece at a time. M of 14 is 1/2 times 14 minus 10, and then I'm going to multiply that by f of negative 1. So it's really important that we separate and evaluate these two pieces separately, and then we'll put them together at the end. So 1/2 of 14 is 7, and 7 minus 10 is negative 3. And over here I've got 4 times negative 1 minus 5. So negative 4 minus 5 is negative 9. So what I have now is I have negative 3 times negative 9, which is positive 27. Number 8, v of negative 9 minus h of 3. So v of negative 9, that's the same thing here where we have v of negative 9, and it doesn't matter if we're putting in 5 or if we're putting in negative 9, it's just equal to 2. So I'm going to have 2 minus, and then h of 3, I'm going to use my h of x function. So 2 to the third power, that's 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So I'm doing 2 minus 8, which is negative 6. Number 9, g of x minus 11. So here's my g of x, so negative 3, and then it says x, so there's nothing to put in for x, so I'm just going to leave it like that. And then minus 11. So what do I do with that? Well, the only thing I can do is simplify by combining like terms. So I've got two constants right there. So I'll keep my negative 3x, and then 7 minus 11 is negative 4. And this is all I can do. I can't do anything else. G of x minus 11 is negative 3x minus 4. And so that's my answer. Okay, next, at the top of the next page, we have a couple of other definitions. It says that f plus g of x, so that's written where the f plus g is inside the parentheses. That is the same thing as saying f of x plus g of x. So one is just another way of saying something else. F minus g of x is the same as saying f of x minus g of x. F times g of x is f of x times g of x, and f divided by g is saying f of x divided by g of x. And so we just have these other ways of writing things, so just so you're familiar with that, so that if you see it written a different way, you know what that means. So number 10, it says if f of x is equal to 3x plus 2 and g of x is equal to 2x minus 7, find f plus g of x. So I'm going to take f of x and I'm going to add g of x. And that's all I need to do as far as setting it up. So I'm just adding these two things together. So what I know from prior experience is that I can combine my like terms And that's all I can do. So that's what f plus g of x is equal to. Number 11, f of x is 3 to the x power. And g of x is 5. And this says that I need to multiply them. Okay, now this takes us back to the very first day of class, and we had a question. Is this the same thing as 15 to the x power? And so on the very first day of class, we had a question like that. And if you think about what we know about exponential equations, remember that we have a times b to the x power, or we had 2 times 3 to the x power. Remember that that told us that we started with 2 and it tripled every time, and that was not the same as 6 to the x power. And so that comes into play right here, because if I have 3 to the x power times 5, or we can write that as 5 times 3 to the x power, I actually can't do anything else with that. That is my answer. That is not the same thing as 15 to the x power because of order of operations. Order of operations says do the exponent first, then multiply by the 5. Since I can't do anything about the exponent, then I'm done. Number 12, we're going to be doing f minus g of x. So I'm going to take 2x minus 3, and I'm going to subtract. Now, subtraction can be kind of tricky. You've got to remember that you're subtracting g of x, which means the entire thing. You need parentheses here. We're going to subtract 4x minus 11 because I'm subtracting all of it. So sometimes it might help if you think about it like this. There's my f of x minus my g of x. And so it might help if you think about it like that. So I'm going to have 2x minus 3, and I'm going to subtract 4x, and I'm going to subtract negative 11. And then I'm going to combine my like terms. And that is my answer. Okay, number 13, it says g minus f of x. Now that's different than f minus g of x. We know from previous experience that 5 minus the 3 is not the same thing as 3 minus 5. So let's see if that's true with functions. So if I take g of x and I subtract f of x, we're still using the same functions from last time. So we're going to take 4x minus 11, and that's my g of x, and I'm going to subtract my f of x, which is 2x minus 3. So again, watch your signs. 4x minus 11, subtract 2x, subtract negative 3, combine my like terms, negative 11 and positive 3. And I have something that looks similar to the last answer, but not exactly the same. Okay, number 14. If f of x is 8x minus 12 and g of x is 2, what is f divided by g of x? So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to divide it by by 2. Okay, this one is, you haven't had very much experience with problems like this, so there's a couple of things that we do know. We do know that 8x minus 12 divided by 2 is the same thing as 8x divided by 2 minus 12 divided by 2. And I think that that might be a really easy way to write that. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 12 divided by 2 is 6, and so that's the answer there. Another thing that you could do, and you'll get a lot more experience with these types of problems next year, but you can say 2 goes into 8 4 times, and it also goes into 12 6 times. The problem with doing that is it's a little bit dangerous, because if you see something like 2x minus 5 over 2, you cannot cancel those out because it doesn't cancel out with a 5. So I think the first way that I showed you, where you separate these out, I think that that's probably the best way to do that. So 8x divided by 2 minus 12 divided by 2. So 8x divided by 2 is 4x. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Okay, number 15, we're going to do f plus g of x. So here's f of x. You might recognize this as exponential growth. We're going to add that to g of x. And if you look, this is one term because it's all combined with multiplication. And we talked about in a previous problem, we can't do anything with that. I can't do 45 times 1.02. that question is just like it is. So 45 times 1.02 to the x power, and then plus 7x plus 3. I actually have 3 different terms here. None of them are like terms. And so actually, there is nothing I can do with that, and that's my answer. Okay, the next question, it says, for what value is f of x equal to g of x? So what I'm doing now is I'm going to be substituting in and solving an equation. So this one says f of x, so I'm going to take the 12x plus 10, which is f of x, and I'm going to say equal g of x. And the question is, I'm trying to find out what value of x is going to make that true. So in other words, I need to solve for x. So this is an example where we have variables on both sides. So we're just going to have our little family reunion. Where do you want the x's to be? I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. Maybe I shouldn't have underlined it. It looks like division. We're going to be subtracting. And so that's going to be gone from there. 12x minus 3x is 9x. And then I'm going to subtract my 10. And then I'm going to divide by 9. So the answer is 2, and what that means, it means when x is 2, then f of x is equal to g of x. And you can check that by saying 12 times 2 is 24 plus 10. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 28. Is 24 plus 10 equal to 6 plus 28? And it actually is true. So there's no other value of x that would make that true. Number 17, for what value of x is v of x equal to d of x? So 4x minus 6 divided by 3 equals 24, which is d of x. And so I'm going to multiply by 3 over 1. So I'll have 4x minus 6 is equal to 24 times 3 is 72. Then I'll add 6 to both sides. It's just a two-step equation now. And I'm going to divide by 4. Okay, we're still under the directions at the very beginning that just says do not round, so we can do a decimal for this. So x is equal to 78 divided by 4 is 19.5. And that's the value of x that would make this true. And you can check that by saying 4 times 19.5 minus 6, and then divide by 3, and you should get 24. Number 18, for what value of x is h of x equal to m of x? And so we're going to figure out what that is. And so this is one of those ones where we're just going to start trying some numbers. So 3 to the first power, 3 to the second power, 3 to the third power. And so just keep trying those with your calculator, and you find out that x is equal to 5 because 3 to the fifth power is equal to 243. Number 19 says for what value of x is g of x equal to v of x. Okay, this one's a little bit harder. What we need to do is get rid of that fraction first because that's a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this side by 3 over 1. And so when I multiply this side, I have to multiply the entire other side, not just the first part, but the entire thing by 3. So I'm going to distribute, and then 3 times 28. And then over here I have 4x minus 6 because the 3's canceled out. So now I can worry about getting my x's together on one side. So I'm going to choose to subtract 4x. So I'm going to have 5x plus 84 is equal to negative 6. And then I'll just subtract the 84. So 5x is equal to negative 90. And then divide both sides by 5. And so I'll get x is equal to negative 18. And that's my answer.